Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In this video, I will explain about the attributive and referential use. First of all, let me introduce our group. My group consists of two persons, me, Ananda Chairunisha, and Farezha Achmady. So, I start from the definition of attributive use. Speaker who use a definite description attributively state something about whoever or whatever is the so and so. For example, she want to marry a man with lots of money. The word a could be replaced by any in this case. Jadi statement itu tidak ditujukan oleh orang yang spesifik, tapi ditujukan untuk siapa saja yang mempunyai banyak uang, pria yang mempunyai banyak uang. Oke, berbeda dengan attributive use, referential use, a speaker who use a definite description referentially. For example, Smith's murderer is insane. Jadi di sini yang dibilang insane adalah pembunuh dari Smith. Ini orang yang sudah ada di pikiran kita, yaitu orang yang spesifik, ditujukan untuk orang yang spesifik, yaitu pembunuhnya si Smith. Ya kan, berbeda dengan yang atributif tadi. Kalau atributif dia menggunakan kata a man untuk untuk menunjukkan orang yang dimaksud, seperti itu. Kurang lebihnya mohon dimaafkan jika tidak ada yang jika ada yang tidak dimengerti, silahkan bertanya. The next presentation will be delivered by Reza Achmady.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Farezha Shadin, and I will continue the explanation for our group, which is alongside with Nova on the previous part of the video. So, when it comes to having the activity of trying to refer to something, or trying to refer to something, or trying to infer to something, we know, which is trying to understand what is it a person trying to reference, is called inference. So, on referencing and inferencing, there is a certain dynamics in which a person might be able to get their communication straightforward. When it comes to trying to refer to something, a speaker, such as me for example, I have to have a goal, a clear goal, and an assumption before I make my references. First of all, the first one is that I have to be certain that my intention to make sure the other person who is listening to me understand what I'm trying to say, is that I have to make it physically and verbally clear. Such as, for example, do you know that person that we met yesterday? Or do you remember that old man who sold us those brooms yesterday? So I have to make sure that the expression in which I use is clearly displayed. And then the second one, which is just as important, is that I have to have an assumption that is saying that to what certain extent does the one that I'm talking to understand what I'm saying. So if this becomes an important topic to discuss in semantics, not only just for the sake of semantics, which is semantic is about the study of meaning, but it also shed a light on how this linguistic expressions or this linguistic activity that we do, we almost take it for granted. So the dynamic in which the success rate of someone understanding your references depends on the speaker's goal, the speaker's assumptions, which is I mentioned before, and the third one, which is just as important, is that the listener's active task to identify that reference. So when you think about it carefully, when someone doesn't understand what you're trying to say, it all comes down to into two things. It is either your intention, your intention or your act of trying to display that intention is not clear enough, which is from your side, and also on the second one is whether the listener is actively trying to understand your reference, because trying to understand these references is probably is going to be very important in a lot of conversation. And what I can tell is that there is this concept called shared visual context. Now, shared visual context simply means that when we are trying to have a conversation, the very context in which we share during a conversation can be visually discussed. Which means it would require whatever it is that I'm referring to be physically exist. Now, it is probably pretty straightforward, right? When I'm trying to make a reference to something that physically exists and something that both the listener and I could see at the moment during conversations is going to be understood, right? But then what happens if it belongs on the shared non-visual context? I mean, when we're trying to have a discussion about something that physically we both know exists, but is not shared visually contextually, what happens if I can imagine it in my head, but then the one that I'm talking to does not? And so this is where the attributive use of expression comes into play. You see, when we try to make a reference of something that is not visually shared, we use descriptions of either their adjective, which is the adjective of that thing or that someone. So, such as, for example, if we were to talk about a political figure that I somehow do not remember the name, but I can tell how that person looks like, and I have certain assumptions that the person that I'm trying to talk to, it could be my friend, it could be a stranger. I have this assumption about them that they might know this person. I might resort to use an attributive use of referencing, such as I describe their clothes, I describe their typical glasses, or I describe the typical speaking style, or what they have said during certain moments, or their involvement in politics, and so on and so forth. But that is the attributive use of referencing. When I do that, I have done my part in trying to explain that. But what about the speakers? Have they understand and what I'm trying to say? At this point, if they don't understand, it might have to boil down to other uses of expressions, which is we can just invent a name for it, or we just use a dietic expressions, which is relying on the shared visual context of that reference thing, which is I have to show the physical thing that I'm discussing about, in which in this case is a person, or I just use whatever vague expressions that I can come up with in order for my friend or that stranger that I'm talking to understand whom I'm trying to say. So yeah, in conclusion is that one thing that we can take is that just because a word for that something exists doesn't mean whatever it is that it is referring physically exists. Because things exist on two realms, in my opinion, which is on the physical side and the concept or the abstract side. Because Bigfoot, for example, there are a mythical creature that we have no physical representation for referencing, but on a conceptual level can be referred to through the use of adjective and etc. But then there are objects that are obviously have physical representation, such as a laptop or this very camera that I'm using to shoot myself with. So Thank you for your time, and that is all the discussion for the attributive use and reference. Thank you.